October 17th, 11:42 p.m. A kitchen light hums over a quiet apartment. The city outside has already dimmed into silence. Across the table, someone says, "You've changed." Not accusing, not curious, just certain. You don't rush to explain. There was a time when you would have, your pulse would have quickened. Words would have lined up defensively like soldiers called to formation. You would have clarified your tone, softened your posture, repaired the atmosphere before it hardened. But tonight something is different. You take a sip of water, the glass is cool in your hand, you notice the faint ticking of the stove clock. You feel the space between you and them not widening, not collapsing, just existing. And for the first time, it doesn't feel dangerous. There was once a version of you trained for immediate repair. Misunderstanding felt like exposure, like standing in the open without armor. If someone misread your silence as arrogance, you corrected them. If they interpreted your boundary as coldness, you softened it. If your introspection was labeled detachment, you rushed to reassure. The persona, the social mask, was efficient. It adjusted in real time, it scanned for approval. It recalibrated tone, posture, vocabulary. It was adaptive, intelligent, and exhausted. Carl Jung believed that the persona forms as a bridge between the individual and society. Necessary, functional, but when it dominates, identity begins to depend on reflection. You become who others believe you to be. And for years, perhaps you didn't even notice. April 2016, a conference room, fluorescent lighting, the faint smell of dry erase marker. You remember sitting upright in a padded chair, listening to colleagues debate an idea you quietly disagreed with. You felt the objection rise in your chest, steady, clear, but you diluted it before speaking. You adjusted your words so they would land softly. You added disclaimers, smiled lightly, you watched their faces for signs of resistance. Afterward, someone said, "You're so agreeable, easy to work with." You wore that sentence like a medal. But later that night, lying awake, there was a subtle hollowness you couldn't name. Why did agreement feel like disappearance? The need to be understood often disguises itself as virtue. It sounds mature, "I just want clarity." It sounds relational, "I don't want conflict." It sounds empathetic, "I don't want to be misinterpreted." But beneath it there is often fear. Fear that misunderstanding equals rejection. Fear that rejection equals isolation. Fear that isolation equals erasure. So the persona works overtime. It rehearses explanations in the shower. It replays conversations while driving. It edits text messages 3 times before sending. It predicts reactions before expressing truth. It becomes fluent in self-translation. And yet something in you began to tire. August 2021, a family gathering, the air thick with familiarity. An uncle laughs and says, "You're too serious these days, lighten up." The room nods, the label floats toward you, waiting to be accepted. You could have explained that seriousness for you is depth, that quiet is not sadness, that reflection is not withdrawal. You could have defended your evolution. Instead, you simply held eye contact, not defiant, not apologetic. Just present. And when you didn't rush to reshape yourself, a strange calm arrived. It startled you. From a Jungian perspective, this is often the first tremor of individuation. When the persona loosens its grip, the ego no longer panics at misinterpretation. Identity begins to root itself internally rather than externally. The mirror of other people's reactions loses its authority. But this shift does not feel triumphant at first. It feels quiet, almost anticlimactic. There is no applause when you stop correcting people. No visible transformation, just the subtle withdrawal of effort. You stop clarifying jokes that fall flat. You stop re-explaining boundaries already stated. You stop defending decisions made in solitude. And slowly, your nervous system recalibrates. February 3rd, 7:18 a.m. Winter light barely touches the window. You scroll through a message thread, someone has misunderstood your intention, again. There is a draft response waiting in your mind, structured, polite, thorough. It would resolve everything neatly. Your thumb hovers over the screen. Then something unexpected happens. You don't feel urgency. The misunderstanding sits there like a misplaced object in a room, noticeable but not catastrophic. You lock your phone. And the world does not collapse. The moment you no longer feel the need to be understood is not rebellion. It is not indifference. It is not superiority. It is the slow realization that your identity does not require unanimous agreement to exist. Carl Jung believed that maturity involves withdrawing projections, both the ones you cast onto others and the ones you allow others to cast onto you. When you stop scrambling to correct how someone sees you, you are refusing to inhabit their projection. You let them own it. And in doing so, you reclaim yourself. But there is a cost. Because when you stop performing alignment, some relationships begin to tremble. Some people preferred the version of you that translated yourself constantly. That version was easier to navigate, predictable, adjustable. The quieter version, less so. And this is where the tension deepens. Because once you taste that internal anchoring, that steady, almost sacred calm, you cannot unknow it. But what happens when being misunderstood begins to filter your world? Who stays? Who leaves? And what part of you is still tempted to explain just one more time? The answer doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives in the next moment of silence. November 2nd, 6:37 p.m. A narrow sidewalk outside a dimly lit cafe. Rain lingers in the air, misting the streetlights. Across from you, a friend of 10 years folds their arms. I just don't feel like you're as open anymore. There it is. Not anger, not accusation, just confusion. You feel it, the old reflex rising, the impulse to reassure, to widen your eyes slightly, lean forward, explain that you're just tired, that you've been thinking more, that nothing is wrong. But your body doesn't follow through. You stand still. You can almost hear it, the faint crack of something invisible beginning to fracture. The persona does not collapse dramatically, it erodes. For years, it protected you, it ensured harmony, it prevented unnecessary friction, it made you readable. Carl Jung believed the persona was necessary for social survival, a uniform worn to function in collective life. But when the uniform fuses with the skin, you forget where performance ends and identity begins. And sometimes, maturity begins not with rebellion, but with fatigue. You grew tired of narrating yourself. Tired of clarifying tone. Tired of cushioning truth. Tired of translating silence into something less threatening. You noticed that the more you explained yourself, the more fragile you felt. Because explanation kept you dependent on acceptance. December 14th, 10:03 p.m. A quiet living room. A disagreement lingers in the air between you and someone you once tried hard to impress. Their words are sharp, not cruel, but dismissive. You're overthinking it, that's just how you are. That's just how you are. A label, a containment, a simplification. Years ago, that sentence would have hooked into you, you would have dissected it privately, wondered if you were too intense, too distant, too complex. Tonight, you simply feel the weight of it and let it drop. Because something inside you has solidified. You are no longer negotiating your depth. When you stop needing to be understood, something else happens, something quieter but more destabilizing. You begin to see who only valued your compliance. Not consciously, not maliciously. But clearly, some people were comfortable with your self-editing. It made interactions smooth, it reduced tension, it allowed them to remain unchanged. But when you stopped adjusting, when you let silence linger instead of filling it, discomfort surfaced. Why aren't you explaining? Why aren't you softening this? Why does your stillness feel different? Because stillness no longer hides uncertainty. It holds it. From a Jungian perspective, this stage signals that the center of gravity is shifting. Identity begins to anchor in the self, not the ego's reflection in others, but something deeper, more stable. You start to notice subtle things. You no longer replay conversations before sleep. You no longer mentally rehearse alternate versions of what you should have said. You no longer feel compelled to win narratives about who you are. There is a strange neutrality where anxiety once lived. And yet this neutrality is not numbness. It is clarity. January 8th, early morning, frost clings to the edges of your window. You wake with a memory not of conflict but of childhood. A classroom, third grade, you raise your hand to explain something carefully, thoughtfully, the teacher interrupts, just give the simple answer. The class laughs lightly. You remember the burn of that moment, the decision, subtle, unconscious, to compress yourself. To simplify. To be easier. To be digestible. And now, decades later, you realize how long that compression lasted. Being misunderstood once felt like humiliation. Now it feels like information. There is power in allowing misinterpretation to stand. It exposes projection. When someone insists you are cold because you are calm, that is their relationship with stillness, not yours. When they interpret your boundaries as distance, that is their discomfort with limits, not your cruelty. Carl Jung believed that what irritates or unsettles us in others often reveals something unresolved within ourselves. When you stop correcting projections, you allow them to return to their source. And this is where relationships subtly rearrange. March 22nd, 4:15 p.m. A park bench beneath bare trees. You sit beside someone who used to dominate conversations. They pause, waiting for you to fill the silence. You don't. The silence stretches, not awkward, just real. For the first time, they begin to speak differently, slower, less certain. Your lack of performance has shifted the rhythm. And you realize something unexpected. When you stopped fighting to be understood, you began to be observed more carefully. Not by everyone, but by those capable of depth. Still, there is loss. Let's not romanticize it. Some connections thin out, invitations become less frequent, certain dynamics dissolve without confrontation. Because the version of you that required validation was easier to predict. This new version, anchored, self-contained, less reactive. It cannot be steered as easily. And some people feel that. You feel it too. A quiet loneliness, not dramatic, not tragic, just transitional. Because when the persona loosens, you are briefly without a familiar script. Who are you when you are not explaining yourself? Who are you when silence is not defense, but choice? The rain outside the cafe finally begins to fall harder. Your friend across from you sighs. I just miss how you used to be. There's tenderness in their voice. And for a flicker of a second, the old urge returns, to step back into the earlier version, to smooth this moment, to reassure them that nothing has changed. But something has. You feel it in your spine, in your breath, in the absence of panic. You say gently, I think I'm just more myself now. The sentence lands between you. And whether they understand it or not, you no longer need them to. But this is only the beginning. Because the deepest shift is still ahead, the moment when you realize you were never meant to be fully understood in the first place. June 9th, 5:52 a.m. The sky is still undecided between night and morning. You're awake before the city, the air is cool, the world feels unclaimed. There's no notification demanding interpretation, no conversation waiting to be managed, no role to step into. Just you unobserved. And in that unobserved space, something becomes undeniable. You feel whole. Not praised. Not validated. Not mirrored. Whole. There was a time when solitude felt like exposure, when being alone with your own thoughts triggered a subtle inventory of how you were perceived. You would replay interactions like archived footage. Did they think I was distant? Too intense? Not warm enough? Now the footage doesn't play. Because you are no longer measuring yourself against invisible witnesses. From a Jungian perspective, this is the movement toward the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, not the persona that negotiates acceptance, not the ego that defends reputation, but something steadier. Something that doesn't flinch at misunderstanding. September 3rd, 8:11 p.m. A dinner party. Laughter rises around the table, stories overlap, opinions sharpen, you speak when you want to, not to balance the room, not to manage perception. At one point, someone misinterprets your quiet as disapproval. You notice it, the flicker in their eyes. You let it pass. You don't correct it. And something extraordinary happens. Nothing. The night continues, the world keeps turning, no collapse, no exile. For years, you believed misunderstanding would cost you belonging. Now you see, belonging built on distortion was never stable to begin with. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires separation from collective expectations, not rebellion for its own sake, but differentiation. the courage to be internally aligned even when externally misread. This is not coldness. It is containment. You are no longer leaking explanations into every silence. You are no longer rushing to soften your edges so others feel comfortable holding you. You are letting them experience you as you are. And if that experience is incomplete, so be it. Because you have stopped trying to be consumable. October 28th, 2:17 p.m. An old message resurfaces on your screen. A paragraph from someone who once said, "You're hard to figure out." You used to read that as failure, as a sign you weren't transparent enough, expressive enough. Now you read it differently. Hard to figure out because you are not a performance. Not an open script waiting to be interpreted correctly. You are layered, evolving, partially private. And for the first time, that feels dignified. There is a subtle authority that forms when you stop narrating yourself. Your posture changes. Your tone steadies. Your reactions slow. Not because you are suppressing, but because you are no longer seeking approval as oxygen. People sense it. Some lean in, curious, drawn to the gravity of someone who does not scramble for validation. Others step back, unsettled by what they cannot quickly categorize. And you allow both reactions. December 12th, 11:59 p.m. The year is almost over. You sit in the dark, lights off, city quiet. You think about who you were 5 years ago, how urgently you wanted to be understood, how carefully you curated words, how much energy went into managing perception. You don't judge that version. They were surviving. But you also see how much of your life was spent negotiating misinterpretation. And now you let it breathe. You let people think you are distant if they need to, serious if it comforts them, mysterious if it simplifies things. Because none of those labels reach your center anymore. Here is the quiet revelation. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Understanding requires depth, patience, and self-awareness. Not everyone has cultivated those qualities, and that is not condemnation, it is reality. When you accept this, resentment dissolves. You stop expecting comprehension from those unwilling to look inward. You stop explaining complexity to those who prefer simplicity. And in that acceptance, your energy returns to you. Fully. January 1st, midnight. Fireworks fracture the sky, cheers echo across rooftops. You stand by the window, watching light scatter across darkness. A year ago, you might have made a resolution about communication, about being clearer, softer, more open. Tonight you make no such vow. Because clarity is no longer about being understood. It is about being aligned. And alignment does not require applause. The world may still misread you. It may still assign motives, interpret silence, fill gaps with its own assumptions. Let it. You are no longer shrinking to fit projections. You are no longer translating your depth into digestible fragments. You have discovered something quieter than validation and stronger than approval. Self-recognition. And once you recognize yourself fully, calmly, without distortion, being misunderstood loses its threat. It becomes background noise. The real shift was never about them. It was about you no longer abandoning yourself to be seen. And in that stillness, in that refusal to perform, you finally meet the version of you that never needed explanation.